Picture the gladiator you know from the movies, all oiled muscle and marble-hard edges. Now let that image soften, because the real fighters of ancient Rome were often eating porridge, drinking curious mineral tonics, and carrying bodies that may have been valued not for sharpness, but for sturdy, practical softness. Good evening and welcome. I'm glad you're here tonight. Tonight we're wandering into the sunlit kitchens, storerooms, sleeping rooms, and dusty training yards of ancient Rome. We're going to meet the men we imagine as fierce, chiseled warriors, and discover that many were fed more like hard-working farmhands than shining heroes. They ate humble grain. They lived by strict meal routines. They trained under watchful eyes. And, most surprising of all, the lean, carved look we often picture may not have been the ideal at all. This is a story about diet culture 2,000 years before our own. It is also a story about class, status, food rules, forgotten routines, and body standards that would puzzle any modern gym. We'll step into a gladiator school as the morning light spills across the sand. We'll stand beside storage jars filled with grain. We'll sit near slow simmering pots. We'll learn why these men were nicknamed after a lowly grain, why meat was not the centerpiece of their table, and why a little extra padding may have been seen as useful, even sensible. In their strange profession, we will keep the arena at a distance tonight. This is not really a story about combat. It is a story about breakfast, supper, oil, bowls, doctors, bread, discipline, and the quiet private life behind a very public image. If you enjoy these quiet wanderings through history, take a moment to subscribe. It's a simple way to keep these stories coming, and it means a great deal. And if you'd like to share something before you drift off, tell me in the comments what your own comfort meal is, the plain, warm food you return to again and again. I always love reading those. Now, before we go any further, let yourself settle. Lower the lights if they aren't already low. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let the pillow take the weight of your head. There's nothing you need to remember tonight, and nothing you need to do. You can simply follow along for as long as you like, and let the rest go. Let the modern world and all its pressures fade for a while. We're going somewhere older, warmer, and far stranger than the movies ever let on. Let's begin with the gladiator you already know. He stands in the arena with his skin gleaming, every muscle carved as if by a sculptor's chisel. His stomach is flat, his arms are impossible. He looks, more or less, like a modern action figure who wandered into a sandal. It's a wonderful image. It's also partly invented. Real gladiators were certainly strong. Many would have been muscular, disciplined, and visually impressive in their own way, but they were not necessarily the lean, bodybuilder-like figures of modern film fantasy. What evidence we have from ancient references and from the study of gladiator burials, especially the well-known remains associated with Ephesus, suggests something more practical and less polished. These were sturdy men, built for repeated effort, heavy training, and a life ruled by food as much as by weapons. There is something reassuring in this. Even history's most famous strong men turn out to have been shaped by ordinary meals, budgets, kitchens, and household rules. The men themselves were busy with something far more practical than looking carved in torchlight. They were trying to endure, and to endure they ate. So let's leave the movie behind and go to where the real work happened. Imagine pushing open a heavy wooden gate just as the first warm light touches a training yard. This is a ludus, a school for gladiators. The floor is sand, raked smooth and already marked by early footsteps. Wooden posts stand here and there, worn pale and smooth, where countless men have struck them with practice weapons. Along the sides are rooms for sleeping, equipment, storage, and medical care. Somewhere inside the walls, grain is being measured. Somewhere else, a cook is stirring a pot before the day becomes hot. A ludus was less a den of chaos and more a strict, humming boarding house for fighting men. It had schedules and supervisors, locked doors and shared rooms. It was a workplace, a household, a training camp, and a business all folded into one. The men who lived here trained for hours each day under the eye of an instructor who had often been a fighter himself. Some had chosen this life for the promise of fame and pay. Many had not chosen it at all. Yet whatever brought them here, they now shared the same routine, the same yard, and the same bowls. The early light warms the tops of the walls. A shouted order sets the day in motion. And before the training truly begins, there is food, because a body cannot be built on discipline alone. The gladiators earned a nickname that sounds almost tender. They were called horderii, which meant, more or less, the barley men. Now, barley in Rome was not the proudest grain. Wheat was the respectable choice, the grain of good bread and fine tables. Barley was cheaper, coarser, and slightly looked down upon. Soldiers could be given barley rations as a punishment when discipline had failed. It was the grain you ate when someone was making a point. And yet this humble grain seems to have been a foundation of the gladiator diet. Ancient writers connect gladiators with barley, and modern analysis of bones has also suggested a grain and legume-heavy pattern. Day after day, these men likely filled up on simple, starchy food. So the nickname stuck, and there's a certain charm to it. History's most feared performers were known, affectionately or mockingly, as the barley men. It tells you something about their world. What you ate said exactly who you were. Wheat bread belonged to comfort, status, and respectability. Barley belonged to work, thrift, and necessity. These fighters could be famous in public and fed like laborers in private. Their power came not from luxury, but from great steaming quantities of the plainest thing in the pantry. Life in the ludus ran on discipline, and the table was no exception. Meals came at set times, portions were likely watched. A man did not simply wander to the kitchen and help himself from a jar. Someone decided what was cooked, how much was served, and how the stores were used. Eating here was part duty, part ritual, and part careful investment. These men were valuable, and a valuable body had to be fed on a schedule. Imagine the storeroom in the cool part of the building. Large clay jars stand against the wall, their bellies full of barley, beans, lentils, oil, and perhaps dried fruit for special use. Sacks are lifted and opened. Grain is scooped, rinsed, ground, boiled, and stretched into meal after meal. The kitchen workers may not have been famous, but they quietly shaped the bodies everyone came to watch. There was a sense in which gladiators were cared for, in the way any expensive asset was cared for. They were housed, fed, treated by doctors, and watched with real attention, because a weak or sickly fighter was no use to anyone. To a modern eye, it looks a little like a training camp with a very serious meal plan. Everything supervised, everything practical. And at the center of it all, that same pale, patient grain. To understand the gladiator's bowl, it helps to pause in the wider Roman pantry. For Romans, grain was not just food. It was security. It was class. It was the difference between a household that felt stable and one that worried about the next market day. Bread, porridge, and pulse sat at the center of everyday eating for much of the population. A A fine table might glitter with sauces, fish, wine, fruit, and imported delicacies, but most bodies in the Roman world were carried through the day by grain. Wheat had a certain dignity. It made better bread and belonged more comfortably to city life and respectable tables. Barley was useful, filling, and less admired. That made the gladiator nickname quietly funny. A man might be celebrated on walls, cheered by crowds and discussed in gossip, yet behind the gate he was still eating the plain food of necessity. This is the everyday absurdity history so often gives us. Public glamour in front, porridge behind. Reputation outside, storage jars inside. A body displayed as spectacle but maintained by bean mash, coarse bread, and someone checking whether there was enough fuel for the cook fire. Here is the surprise at the heart of the whole story. Some scholars have suggested that gladiators may have benefited from carrying a layer of fat. The reasoning is strangely practical. A padded body can offer a little protection. Beneath the skin, fat lies over nerves and blood vessels that run closer to the surface. In a profession where visible wounds could be part of the public show, extra covering may have made certain injuries less immediately serious. It may also have helped men absorb knocks, keep their strength through heavy training, and maintain reserves in a demanding life. We should be careful here. We cannot climb inside a Roman trainer's mind and know exactly what he wanted from everybody in the school. Not every gladiator looked the same, and different fighting styles may have favored different builds. But the evidence does invite us to imagine an ideal that was broader, heavier, and less sharply lean than ours. Think of how strange this would sound in a modern gym. We spend fortunes and endless hours trying to strip away the very thing these fighters may have been encouraged to keep. For them, a little softness could be sensible. The lean, carved look we prize today might have seemed, at least in some contexts, like a body with nothing to spare. The shape a person is told to want has never been fixed. It shifts with the age and with what that age happens to need. Somewhere in the ludus, a heavy pot has been quietly bubbling since before sunrise. Let's go and sit beside it. The cook fire glows low, and over it hangs a great clay pot, wide and round. Inside, barley has been simmering into a thick mash, softened with time and patience. Often there are beans or lentils, fava beans especially, mashed into the grain until the whole thing becomes dense, earthy, and filling. A wooden ladle stirs it now and then, slow circles through the steam. This is not food that hurries. It cooks for hours, growing thicker and softer, until a spoon can almost stand up in it. There is no great seasoning, no showmanship. It is plain, warm, and honest. The fighters ate this in large amounts. It gave them fuel for long hours of training and helped build sturdy bodies. It was the same meal, more or less, day after day, and there is something deeply settling in that sameness. A pot on the fire, grain going soft, the quiet certainty that when the training was done, the bowl would be full. Not every meal was porridge alone. There may have been coarse bread, broken by hand and dipped into broth or oil. There may have been bean stews thick enough to scoop. There were bowls of clay, cups for water or watered wine, and spoons worn smooth from use. Roman dining could be elegant in wealthy houses, with reclining couches and elaborate dishes brought in courses. But the barracks table was simpler. These men were not arranging themselves for polite dinner conversation under painted ceilings. They were eating because the body had been used and needed filling. Still, even the plainest meal has its own manners. A place at the table, a familiar bowl, the same neighbor sitting nearby, the little pause before the first spoonful when everyone is too tired to speak, the passing of bread, the scrape of a spoon, the quiet satisfaction of food that does not pretend to be anything other than useful. For all the spectacle attached to gladiators, much of their life was this: repeated meals, repeated training, repeated washing, repeated sleep. History often remembers the rare public hour. The body remembers the routine. You might expect these fighters to tear into roasted meat by the platter. It feels right somehow that warriors should feast on flesh, but their daily plates appear to have told a different story. Meat was probably not the centerpiece of the ordinary ludus diet. The strength of these men came largely from grains and legumes, from that steady tide of barley, beans, lentils, and bread. There were sensible reasons. Meat was expensive, and feeding a whole school of hungry fighters roasted animal every day would have been a fortune. Grains and beans were cheaper, kept well, and filled a body up. Beans in particular were quiet powerhouses, rich in the nourishment that helps build a sturdy frame. A bowl of mashed fava beans lacked glamour, but it did the job. So the gladiator's power was, in a way we don't often picture, a largely plant-fed power. Bean by bean, spoonful by spoonful, the barley men were built from the garden and the grain store rather than the butcher's block. In Rome, olive oil was less an ingredient and more a way of life. It flowed everywhere. It went into the cooking pot, softening food and adding richness. It burned in small lamps that lit the rooms, and it went onto the body itself. Romans rubbed oil into their skin, worked it in, and then scraped it away with a curved metal tool called a strigil, carrying dust and sweat with it. For the gladiators, oil belonged to work, grooming, and display. Before public appearances, a man's skin might be rubbed with it until it shone. It made the body look striking in the sun, all warm light and gleaming shoulders. After training, oil helped clean the skin when water alone was not the Roman habit in quite the way it is ours. Follow that golden thread from the kitchen to the washing room, and you find the same amber liquid at every turn. Poured from a clay jug, it caught the afternoon light. It smelled faintly of the groves it came from. It was food, lamplight, grooming, and care all at once, and no Roman day was complete without it. A gladiator school needed more than trainers and cooks. It needed people who understood bruises, bones, skin, digestion, and rest. Roman medical care was not modern medicine, of course, but gladiators could receive careful attention. They were valuable, and their bodies were watched. A doctor attached to a school would have understood the ordinary complaints of hard training: sore joints, tired muscles, strained backs, and the small injuries of practice. Food, sleep, oil, bandaging, and bathing all belonged to the same system of care. After training, the washing routine mattered. Dust clung to the skin, oil gathered it, the strigil drew it away in long, quiet strokes. Warm rooms, basins, cloths, and the smell of olive oil made recovery feel almost domestic. There is something unexpectedly tender in that image. A body used for public hardness being privately cleaned, fed, and repaired. Again and again, the daily life of the ludus returns to maintenance. Not glory, maintenance, the old human work of keeping a body going. Every now and then, something sweet found its way into the barracks, and it was treasured. Amid all that plain grain, small luxuries appeared. Dried figs, wrinkled and dark and wonderfully sweet. Raisins, sticky in the hand. And now and then honey, the great sweetener of the ancient world, stirred into a bowl of porridge or eaten slowly from the fingers. These weren't everyday things for everyone. They were little pleasures in a disciplined life, treats that broke the sameness of the daily mash. A handful of figs at the end of a long day would have felt like a real gift. Honey turned ordinary grain into something to look forward to. There is a simple comfort in imagining it. A tired fighter sitting with his bowl, finding a thread of sweetness in the plainness. Even in a place built around strength and strict routine, someone had thought to set aside a little sweetness for the men. It's the kind of small kindness that makes a hard life more bearable. Their version of a recovery drink was, let's say, an acquired taste. Modern studies of gladiator remains have suggested unusually high mineral intake, especially compared with some other ancient populations. One explanation often discussed is an ash-based drink made from plant ash, bone ash, or mineral-rich residue mixed with water or vinegar. Ancient writers also mention ash preparations in medicinal contexts, so the idea is not as strange to Romans as it sounds to us. Still, we should picture it gently and with a little caution. Not every detail can be known. But imagine a cloudy cup with a sharp, sour edge, handed over after hard training like medicine. To us, it sounds unpleasant. To them, it may have seemed practical. Ash could provide minerals, including calcium, useful to bodies under strain. A body worked hard every day needed help repairing itself. This rough drink may have delivered something those aching bones required, so picture it as a distant ancestor of the modern recovery shake, only grayer and without any pretense of tasting nice. The fighters drank it down, made whatever face one makes at ash and vinegar, and went on with their evening. When the training ended, the hall filled with the soft, ordinary sounds of men simply eating. Evening settled over the ludus, the weapons were set aside, the sand left to cool. And the fighters gathered at long tables to share the day's last meal. There was the scrape of wooden spoons against clay bowls. There was low talk, the kind that comes easily among people who have worked hard side by side. There was the heavy tiredness of bodies that had given everything and now only wanted to rest. It was, beneath all the fearsome reputation, a domestic scene. Men eating together at the close of a long day, filling their bowls again from the great pot, tearing at coarse bread, passing the last of the figs down the table. For all that waited for them in public, this hour was gentle and familiar. And if you stood between their world and ours, you might notice something worth carrying with you. Where they may have valued sturdiness and softness, we often chased leanness for the mirror. Their ideal and ours point in different directions, and yet each felt, in its own time, like simple common sense. Body ideals drift and change. They always have. There's a quiet relief in remembering that none of them last. The cook fires are burning low now. The great pot has been emptied and set aside, and the embers beneath it glow a deep, tired red. The last figs have been tucked away in their jar. The wooden spoons are gathered, wiped, and left to dry. In the storeroom, the clay jars stand in their rows, holding tomorrow's barley, tomorrow's beans, tomorrow's plain and useful meal. Out in the yard, the sand has cooled, and the practice posts stand dark and still against a darkening sky. The day's footprints are softening at the edges. The smell of oil, smoke, grain, and warm stone lingers in the air. The men are drifting towards sleep. Some sit a while longer, saying little. Others have already gone to their rooms, lying down at last on simple beds, letting the long days sink out of their muscles. The oil lamps burn small and steady, throwing soft light along the walls. There is no training now, no schedule to keep, only the slow cooling of stone that held the day's warmth, and the faint smell of grain and smoke still hanging in the air. Somewhere, the last lamp is pinched out. The barley men, so fierce in the daylight, are only resting bodies in the dark now, breathing slow, folded into sleep like anyone else at the end of a working day. The courtyard holds its quiet, the embers settle lower, and the ludus, which hummed with effort all day long, grows peaceful under the first stars. Beyond the walls of the school, the fields stretch out under the moon. This is barley country, and the grain grows tall and pale in the night. A soft wind moves across it, and the whole field sways together, silver in the moonlight, whispering the way ripening grain does. This is the very kind of grain that fed the men behind those walls, still growing, still swaying, long after the day's work is done. Everything is still now. The stone walls hold their faint warmth. Far off, the last low glow of a fire fades to nothing. The moon rests high and quiet over the fields. There is nothing here but soft things, grain in the dark, a gentle wind, the slow, easy turning of the world toward morning. And the barley bends and rises under the wide and peaceful sky. Thank you for wandering through these ancient kitchens with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed meeting the barley men, with their slow pots of porridge, their clay bowls, their oil lamps, and their strange, sensible world of strength and softness. It's a good thing to remember as you lie there now. Bodies and beauty standards drift like grain in the wind. What one age prizes, another quietly forgets. None of it needs to trouble you tonight. You don't have to hold on to any of it. You don't have to remember a single name or detail. You can simply let it all settle the way a pot settles off the fire. Rest now. Let your body be heavy and warm and cared for. Wherever you are, I hope you feel safe and comfortable, wrapped in the quiet of the hour. Sleep well, and I'll be here with another gentle story whenever you're ready. Good night.